Hi everyone, hope you're all keeping well. Welcome to my wrap-up video for all the books I read in the month of May. I started this month by picking up Firekeepers Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This is a Nancy Drew-esque mystery following an Obituary girl as she gets involved in an FBI investigation into the drug-related deaths in her community after she witnesses a murder. This was a really enjoyable read. I kind of had no idea what it was about going in. I think for some reason, maybe because of the cover, I thought it was going to be a fantasy book, but it wasn't. It is a contemporary mystery. I thought Danis was a really interesting main character, being within the Anishinaabe community that is in this book, but also since she's not an enrolled member, feeling that disconnect of not truly being a part of that community, but still learning all the traditions and all her heritage. For me, who knows absolutely nothing about a lot of the Native American people and the different tribes, it was really interesting reading about their traditions and their way of life. It was really interesting from my perspective to read about, and as well within the context of this story was very interesting. I thought all the characters were really interesting to read about. There's a relationship in here as well that's begins as fake dating and then obviously becomes something more, because we love a good bit of a fake dating trope, and I actually really liked the way that relationship was handled, because there is that sort of almost power dynamic between the two that is sort of addressed, and I like the way that it unfolds and the way that it ends up by the end of the book. Obviously I won't give spoilers, but I do like how it ends up, and I think it's very mature, which is not something I was really expecting from the way it was sort of going to begin with. I will give trigger warnings for on-page rape and on-page death. But yeah, I think I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. It's definitely a very, very good book. It does deal with some heavy themes, so I will give you a bit of warning about that. But other than that, it was a very enjoyable read. Next up is Witches Steeped in Gold by Sienna Smart. This is a Jamaican-inspired fantasy about two rival witches who have to team up together to try and help overthrow the tyrannical queen of their country. I love the world building of this story. It's so rich and vibrant, and the Jamaican-inspired setting is just not something I've come across before. I loved the sort of different witch sections and how the politics of how the world has unfolded and how it's gotten to be where it is now. My only issue with this book is I hated 2 of the 3 main characters. You've got 3 main characters, you've got 2 witches, and then one of the witch's best friend who then also ends up falling into a romance with the other witch. I couldn't have cared less about him. I couldn't have cared less about the girl he starts falling in love with. I couldn't have cared less about their relationship. I was expecting a bit more of an actual alliance between these 2 witches, but they spend far more time between both of these 2 witches and that other boy. So you don't actually get too much interaction between these 2, which I was really annoyed about, because, you know, it's pitched as them 2 having the alliance, but like you spend more time with one of these 2 with this other guy who, as I said, I really couldn't care less about him. So when plot twists came up later surrounding his character, I was like, anyway, moving on, because I couldn't have cared less. I loved one of the characters though. Like, I really enjoyed seeing her journey and how where she ends up by the end of this book. I thought that was really fun to read about, and she was just the most interesting character, trying her best to make the right decisions for herself and for her country, but sort of almost ultimately going down possibly the wrong path, and basically ending up as the antagonist by the end of the book, I think. I can't quite tell where she's going with that, but yeah, I found her journey to be the most interesting. Couldn't have cared less about the other 2, but I did really enjoy the world building, and I thought it was a really good debut. I think I gave this 3 out of 5 stars, and yeah, not sure if I would recommend it or not, but again, as I said, it is quite subjective, my opinion, on the fact that I hated 2 of the main characters. I then read Dream Country by Ashley Brown. This is a fantasy book that follows 3 siblings, the god of sleep, the god of nightmares, and the goddess of dreams, who are all suspect in the murder of their mother, who is Night. I loved the world building of this. Again, you sort of got the sort of dream country, well, sleep, you know, the sort of big country that the 3 of these live in, sort of above the human world, and then there's staircases that come down to it, and they come down every sort of 10-20 years or something to see the humans and stuff, and there's this whole religion around that, and I'm really bad at explaining it, but it is a really good book. The 3 of them in their country have sort of divided it up between themselves and put up walls because they don't trust one another after the murder of their mother. They don't trust that, you know, they want to keep themselves to themselves, but then something happens that causes the walls to start failing, and everything really starts kicking off from there. you're only ever in two of the siblings' perspectives. You're in Theo's and you're in Torres's view. You never see Fanta, the goddess of dreams. And I thought that was a really interesting decision to go with, but I know this is going to be a trilogy, so I'm hoping we'll maybe get some of Fanta's point of view later in the series. But I really loved Theo's point of view, and I also loved Torres as sort of the antagonist. He's sort of the dark sibling that the other two don't really trust at all. It was a really interesting dynamic between the three of them, and their motivations and their relationships with one another and how that's changed because of what happened to their mother and the way things have been going since then. It's just really interesting to read about, and as I said, I really liked the world building, how the humans have formed this religion around the three of them, and they have this celebration where three humans will get picked by one of these guys and they get to go up to sort of the god's country for a week or something. Just a really interesting idea. It's such a interesting mash of lots of different countries and cultures that was just really interesting to see, and it was a really fresh story, and I have absolutely no idea really what went on in this book, though. That's the thing. But that's not a bad thing, because it just didn't go in any of the directions I thought it was going to go in, and the way that it ended, my god, I need the next one, because I have no idea what happened at the end there. I want to find out what happens next. I think I gave this 4.5 stars out of 5, maybe 5. It is really very good, and I enjoyed it very, very much. I then read The Gilded Ones by Nomina Forna. This is a fantasy book about a girl who, in her village and in her country, there's a tradition of when you turn 16, all the girls will have their blood tested to see if they are pure or impure. If they are pure, their blood will run red. If they're impure, it will run gold. And the girls in the lead up to this are kept away from knives and stuff, so they can't find out beforehand whether they're pure or impure. You know, there's this whole thing about, you know, you have to find out at the ceremony. And then at the ceremony they get attacked by these creatures called death shrieks, and just before she gets her blood tested, they're all attacked, but then her blood runs anyway and they see that she has impure gold blood. But then a mysterious woman turns up to offer her the chance to, instead of being killed by the death mandate that is out for all the impure girls, she's invited to come and work for the emperor as a soldier, because the impure girls are very difficult to kill. The only ways you can really kill them are dismemberment, beheading, or I think drowning's the other one. Other than that, they can basically come back from anything in this thing called the Gilded Sleep, which their blood allows them to sort of heal themselves. It's a really interesting blend of sort of almost dystopian themes within a fantasy world, because, you know, the whole sort of, you know, thing happens at age 16 to tell you whether you are something or you aren't something, and then you go to this place to get trained. It's, you know, very much reminds me of dystopian YA fiction. So having that sort of concept within this fantasy world was really interesting for me, and the world building as well. The visuals that sort of came up from the descriptions, you know, all the women, once they've turned 16, have to wear masks out in public, and some of them are just sort of plain, but some of them are really bejeweled and gorgeous. And the city is sort of within all these walls, and there's this great big waterfall and this huge statue, and there's just these fantastic descriptions that just really build on this rich and beautiful world, and it was really interesting to visualise that as I was reading it. There does become a bit of a plot point where the main character, Decca, is, you know, the special one. She's so special, everything revolves around her, and as a result, even she barely gets any character development. Well, she does kind of get some character development, but not as much as I would perhaps like. But then the side characters really don't get that much development, in my opinion, because it's just all about her. But then you find out later why, and I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, I kind of understand why it's all about her, and yada yada. It bothers me less when I find out why, but up until that point, I do still find it quite irritating, because I've had it to death with the special main girl character is so special, oh my gosh. But yeah, I did really enjoy this book. Trigger warnings though for violence, really. There's on-page dismemberment and stuff that happens to the girls that's described. There's just a description of rape and murder of a child. It's quite graphic in areas, so I will warn you about that. But it is very good. Yeah, there's lots of stuff that I liked, lots of stuff that I didn't like, but then things that happened later almost sort of made the things that I didn't like kind of make sense, and even though I still didn't like them, I could understand why their place in the story. So yeah, I really liked Britta, her friend. I thought she was a really cool character. Shame she didn't get as much development as I perhaps would have liked, But I thought she was a really sweet character and I really want to see more of her. I know this could work as a standalone, but I think it is going to be a series. So I am definitely, I think, going to continue with it and see what happens next and see if there's more development for some of the side characters now that, now that they've got more time to work with it and it not to always revolve around the main character. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. Hello, it is now a different day. I was filming these just on my phone, just whilst I was getting used to it and whilst I was working out how to get the focus on my camera properly. And then my phone ran out of storage because it's an old iPhone and no matter how many things I delete off of it, it still says that I've got absolutely no space on my phone left. So, yeah, apologies if this suddenly gets a bit jarring because the quality's changed and things, but yes, so I'm just going to continue with the last couple of books for my wrap-up for May. So then I read Sister Song by Lucy Holland. This is a reimagining of The Two Sisters, which is an old English folk ballad, and follows three siblings, Riva, Keen and Cinna. It's set in 535 AD with the looming Saxon War in the east, and everything changes when a young man called Tristan turns up and just starts to change the girls' lives. With the whole sort of, trend really recently of retelling old fairy tales, this is the first time I've really come across a retelling of a ballad of an old English folk song, which I thought was a really interesting concept. This cover is just absolutely beautiful, I absolutely love it, and the three siblings that we follow are just fascinating characters and each have their own distinct voice. You do follow their 3 points of view, but they each feel different and they each have their own story to tell. They don't feel like the same character. My favourite was definitely Keen, and their story is about a transition. They're transitioning from female to male, and it's not just a gender transition story, it's a story about how Keen becomes a leader and becomes the heir to the throne whilst also transitioning at the same time and getting everyone to change their perspectives of him, not only gender-wise but also as I'm who should be leading. Don't just see me as a weak woman. For starters, I'm not a woman, and second of all, I can lead you, I can step up and be king once my father dies. And I just loved that whole idea that it wasn't just one story, it was a couple of stories that had similar beats and similar ideas, but they kind of went well together, and I thought that was a really interesting idea, and it did just make for such a compelling narrative, a compelling development of this character, and especially since Keen is the one that has the most magic and has the most idea about all of that was going on. I really liked the magic in this and how, because there's a witch and also a storyteller that show up, and they start to teach the girls in Keen about magic, and I liked that whole idea that magic didn't come from gods, it came from the land. Just such an interesting idea. They sort of went, yeah, fuck religion, this is just, it's almost a kind of giving love back to planet Earth and those whole ideas of Mother Earth and Gaia and all those things from all these old traditions. There's also a really interesting plot point about Christianity and the rising wave of that at this time, because this is post-Romans, this is post the Roman invasion, so there is still semblances of Christianity sort of beginning to take over the old pagan practices, and this is actually the second book I read this year that's not criticised Christianity but had that idea of this is people coming in and forcing a different religion onto others and not considering the consequences, because perhaps those old pagan practices actually had a point, they actually had a reason for why that was being done. Because the other book that I read that did that was The Bear and the Nightingale, so if you've read The Bear and the Nightingale you'll know what I mean. There's a similar sort of plot point with this, with the whole idea of the king has turned his back on the old practices and has lost his connection to the land, so now it's up to Keen to forge his own connection, which then helps to convince people that he should be the next heir because he now has the connection to the land as the king once did. And I just like that plot point again. It was very compelling and very interesting to read about. I did like the other two sisters as well. I thought Sina was a really interesting character. This is the youngest daughter who's spoiled and looking for a bit of romance and things. She sort of couldn't really care less about religion or magic. She just wants some handsome prince to whisk her away. So when Tristan turns up, she feels very jealous when his attention's all on her older sister Riva, because she sort of gets it into her head that he should be the one who comes to whisk her away. But I did like that she begins to learn a lesson about not just judging people for what's on the surface and beginning to pay attention and respect the differences and respect other people, because she and to stop thinking of herself all the time. She makes friends with Tristan's sort of mute manservant Os, and I just really liked their friendship. I thought they were really sweet. Riva, again, she was a really interesting character, but she didn't have as much development as the other two, really. She sort of falls in love with Tristan, and that's kind of where her character journey kind of ends, or at least to me that's how that felt. But it was a really good story. I was expecting to enjoy it, and I did. It was a really interesting imagining. The world building was really cool, the magic was great. All three characters were fantastic. Again, as I said, Keen's definitely the standout. And it was just a really good sibling dynamic. And I just, as I said, loved the setting, and I loved the idea of reimagining an old folk ballad. So 5 out of 5 stars, highly recommend. Finally, I discovered that on Spotify, if you have Spotify Premium, which I do, I listen to a lot of music, you can get some audiobooks just for free on there. I found that the entirety of the Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater is just available on Spotify, so I have listened to the first 3. I'm currently about halfway through the Raven King. And I've read these books before physically, I've got them all. They're some of my favourite books, some of my favourite covers. The artist is Adam S. Doyle, who's one of my favourite illustrators and artists. They really lend themselves well to being read aloud in audiobook form, because if you've read them you'll know that they're so atmospheric and sort of spooky without being scary. They're not horror books, but they do have like ghosts and magic and stuff. If you don't know what the Raven Cycle is about, it is about this girl called Blue Sargent who, her mother and all her aunts are psychics, but she isn't, and she's been told all her life by psychics who have foretold her future that if she kisses her true love he will die. And one night she's out with her aunt, because this is what the psychics do every year on St Mark's Eve at the end of April, is they'll go to a church, and this will allow them to be able to see the spirits of all the people in the local area who will die in the next year. And Blue, not being a psychic, is there just to help her aunt. But for the first time she sees a spirit, and it's of this boy, and he tells her name is Gansey, and that's all she is able to get from him. And her aunt says that the reason she sees this spirit, despite the fact that she's not psychic, is for one of 2 reasons. Either he's her true love, or she will be the one to kill him. Which, given what she's been told all her life about her seeming curse that to kill her true love with a kiss, it could possibly be both. And then one day Gansey then turns up at the house to get a reading with his friends, and she gets involved and everything goes from there. Just a lovely story about how she becomes such good friends with Gansey and his friends Ronan, Noah and Adam, and the whole friendship the 5 of them have, and because Gansey and his friends are looking for this dead Welsh king that he thinks has been buried on a ley line in West Virginia in Henrietta, which is where it is set. And it's just such a fantastic story. Just that, like I said, it's spooky but not scary. There's magic, there's old Welsh medieval history, there's this search for this king because they believe that maybe he's still alive and he'll be able to grant them a favour. There's this angsty sort of romance between Blue and Gansey that gets going on because she knows he's doomed to die, but she doesn't quite know how to tell him or if she should. And I love that the author takes the time to not just focus on 1 or 2 of the characters. All 5 of the characters, plus their relationships with all the other people, are fully fleshed out, because it could be very easy just to focus on Blue and Gansey, or Gansey and Adam, or Ronan and Adam or something, you know, just almost like the sort of core characters, because Gansey is a hugely influential character. He's not treated as more important than the others just because the story does kind of almost revolve around him more than it would the others. I like that they take the time to flesh out, you know, Blue and Ronan's friendship, Blue and Adam's friendship, Adam and Noah's friendship, Noah and Gansey's friendship, Noah and Ronan's friendship. Like, there's all the sort of pairings, each have their own moments and own establishments of why they're friends, and then also why they're friends in a big group and things, and it's just really good fun. And it is just a lovely story, and I absolutely love it every single time I read it. It's one that I wasn't expecting to love the first time I read it, but then I did, obviously, and it's one I'll go back to time and time and time again. I've just really enjoyed actually listening to it and hearing it read aloud, because it's so atmospheric and well written, and it also means I'm actually listening to it. I'm not skipping over things, which I do sometimes. I do skim read from time to time, which is just a really bad habit I need to get out of. And so I'm almost picking up on more things that I miss the last 5 times I've read it physically, which is really good fun. And it's also sort of making me come to the conclusion that, because I think I saw that it had sort of got its TV rights bought, I think, but that's sort of ground to a halt because they haven't been able to find anyone who's able to adapt it properly, so that's maybe not going to happen anymore. Make it an animated show. Because this book is so weird, the visuals are bizarre. Draw it. I think it needs to be an animated show. It needs to be some fun animated series, several seasons with just bizarre visuals, cool character designs, cool concepts. It would just work so much better than live action, so do it, somebody in animation. Go and get the rights for it, because it would be a good show to see animated. But yeah, that's all from me today. Thank you very much for watching. If you read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts on them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. And what books have you read in the month of May? Did you have a good reading month, bad reading month? Let me know. I'd love to hear about it. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.